Hello, this is Idodmg and welcome back to the channel. In this Dwarven Realms video, I want to talk to you about all the different dungeons in the game and how the progression starts, starting from Rupture 1 all the way up to the Rupture level 60 boss, Zool. In this video, we're going to talk more about what the dungeons do, what the purpose are of these dungeons, and I'm going to do my best attempt here to give you all that information in this video so you know what dungeons you should be prioritizing and what rewards to expect from each dungeon. So if you're new to Dwarven Realms, the way that the game works is you're going to be doing Ruptures. Rupture is basically the levels that you're going to be doing. So starting at Rupture 1, you'll get a taste of exactly what the game is. You go into an arena, you kill loads and loads and loads of monsters until you have enough time essence to go and fight the boss. Now, you don't always have to immediately go fight the boss, but you can stick around and continue to farm monsters if you want to, more power, more loot. There's different events that spawn on these Ruptures, containers, all that fun stuff. So once you're at a high enough Rupture that you're having a hard time progressing, it's okay to continue to farm the same one for a little bit there. And we'll talk about it all here in the video, some breakpoints and stuff like that for you. And the other thing to note here is when you're in a Rupture, you have a 10-minute time limit. But in this video, we're really going to be focusing more on the dungeons we're going to get to here in a minute. So when you very first start out the game at Rupture 1, Ruptures 1 through 36 are going to be your story dungeons. You're going to be unlocking new stuff for your fort, new content that you can do through the different dungeons that we're going to talk about. And once you complete Dungeon 36, you'll unlock the 6 endgame islands that you can see on the perimeter of the outside of the map in Dwarven Realms. Also, while you're doing the story missions, you're going to encounter some interesting bosses. So if you're trying to, you can unlock a way to skip ahead in Ruptures. And if you're like, well, I can skip 3 usually, but this one's only letting me skip 1 or 2, that's because there's a boss there that's stopping your progress that you need to take down. And then you can go back to your normal progression there through those beginning Ruptures. Once you've unlocked the end game islands and you're deciding which island you want to run, there's a couple things you could factor in. You could go off of what monograms you want to farm. Each island drops a specific item slots set of monograms that you can farm until you get the one you want. I will have a link in the description below that has the wiki, and it'll show you which island is for which item slot and all the monograms so you can farm to your heart's content. But I wish you the best of luck that you get the monogram early on, because some of these have a massive pool that you really have to farm and get lucky. It's just an RNG chance if you get the monogram you want or not. But eventually you'll farm enough and you'll have all of them, so it won't really matter. Then the other thing you could factor in is what materials you want to farm. Materials are tied to the endgame islands. For example, the planks that I'm always trying to farm drop on the very bottom center map down here. But again, all that information is on the wiki as well. So let's go ahead and talk about progression here, and we'll come back to these endgame islands here in a little bit. Very early on, I think around Rupture 21, you're going to unlock the daily NPC Void in your fort. I do have a daily guide video. Make sure you check that out after you watch this video. But through these dailies, you can get a Catacombs key. Now, instead of using this Catacombs key immediately, you want to push the highest Rupture that you can possibly do until you're absolutely stuck, and then use your Catacombs key. And that's because the gear that drops in Catacombs scales off the highest Rupture you have cleared, plus 22 Rupture levels. And I have a full Catacombs guide video as well. Make sure you check that one out after this video. That's kind of the Catacombs. You don't want to run it immediately. You want to hold on to that key until, again, you've cleared the highest Rupture possible. Another dungeon that unlocks pretty early on is the Gravedigger's Cove. Now, this, I believe, unlocks around Rupture 38, and you're going to get keys. I believe you can get them from dailies. You can also craft them as well. But the Gravedigger's Cove is really special. It's a 4-minute long dungeon, and it's set up where you have a chamber in the middle with an NPC that you can talk to, and then branching out from this middle chamber, there's 5 separate crypts. Now, when you talk to the person in the middle, he'll open up one of these crypts that you can go into. And the goal of this dungeon is you want to make sure that you at least go to all 5 of those crypts at least once so you can maximize your earnings. The other trick to this as well is you want to level up your magery, because you want to be able to have access to your flame dash skills as well as your ground blast. And again, 1,300 magery, and you'll have access to that. If you do want to see a full breakdown of the Gravedigger's Cove, I do have a guide video. Make sure you check that out. It goes more in depth into my strategy with it. I'm trying my best to not do a bunch of shameless plugs here in the video, but I do also want to kind of keep this video structured and to the point so that you know what the purpose is of all these dungeons. Next up, we have Alicia's Lair. This is going to be your pet dungeon. This one unlocks pretty early. I believe it unlocks around Rupture 45. You can get access to this dungeon from Dragon Bloods. You can get it from dailies. You can also, if you find an egg in a rupture, you find them and you're like, what are these for? You can actually use 20 of them to craft a dungeon to enter in here. And the way that Alicia's lair works is you go in, you kill a giant dragon, you get your loot, but at the end there's a dragon trainer, so you can upgrade your dragon pet. You can increase the damage on it and unlock some really fun perks on there as well. There's perks ranging from allowing you to benefit from a second element, getting a buff when you dodge. I think there's an auto loot pickup. Another perk you can get on your pet is you can spawn auras that when you pick them up, you'll get a damage boost. What's really awesome about Alicia's Lair is this you can run over and over and over again and continue plussing up your pets. Now keep in mind, most of these dungeons that we're going to talk about, when you complete it one time, it will go up one Rupture level each time that you complete it. And this is infinitely. So if you're just grinding away, you could potentially get to a point where you can't beat that dungeon anymore because the Rupture level is just way beyond your capabilities. Alicia's Lair, though, starts out at 45, so to hit that point, it's going to take an awful lot of grinding. The next dungeon that you're going to unlock is around Rupture level 50, and this is the Underground Enclave. This one has a really rare mount that can drop in there. It's a scorpion mount. Ultra rare mount. I think I've done the place 300 times and I still haven't seen the mount. But it's not just about the special mount. Obviously, you can gain some power in there. There's a bunch of rewards. And again, when you do these dungeons, there's more rewards than what I'm telling you. I'm just kind of giving you the highlights of why you would want to run that dungeon. Now, the Underground Enclave is no different in that sense. You can get, obviously, your monograms, the normal typical loot you'd find in any dungeon. But the other important part of Enclave is that you can get some early stance gear early on, but you can also find stance stones, which is how you increase your stance's damage from the stones that you're throwing into your fossils. So this is a good source of that as well. Now you're going to be getting into the point here where you're going to be using a resource called Imbued Dwarven Runes. Now these Imbued Dwarven Runes, you'll eventually get a lot of them, but early on they can be a little bit more limited. But you're going to actually be sharing these with a couple different dungeons. The Underground Enclave, Midlothier, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, as well as your Olympus and Bridge of the Demigods. So what I usually do is I'll just kind of run what I can, but you do kind of want to try to save these up for when you can do the Bridge of the Demigods. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, so let's get back to it. So after Enclave, your next dungeon that you're going to be hitting up is called Midlothier. Midlothier is typically not heavily farmed. I think you can get some decent items early on. It may be worth a run or two. I typically don't heavily farm Midlothier just because Olympus is right around the corner at Rupture 80, where you can actually find some really special gear. Before we talk about that, though, the next kind of break point here I want to talk about is at this point you should be pushing Rupture 75 or higher. Now, once you unlock that, you can actually get these scrolls. If you recall, we were talking about the end game islands at the beginning of the video. Now, there's scrolls in the game that you can unlock once you are doing them on Rupture 75 or higher. You can find scrolls in there that are used for a couple different things. You can use them to buy Fortune Tomb tokens, so that when you infuse Ruptures, you can modify your map. You also can use these scrolls to buy Elven Capital keys for your crafting dungeon. You can also use these to craft one of the later game dungeons, the Bridge of the Demigods. So these have a lot of value. So the point I'm trying to make here is try to get it to where you can farm the 75 Rupture and higher. And once you can, that's when you would want to really start grinding and just make sure it's above 75. Because 74 and below, you will not be getting these scrolls. I know I mentioned the Elven Capital really briefly there, and we're not going to go in depth on this one, but you will unlock this through your Elven faction by turning in resources to the NPC over here, and then putting points. It's this node right here, the Lost Path. You get a chance to discover ancient worlds when mining any node in Rupture level 70. Yes, it's above 70, but again, the scrolls are 75. So 75 is kind of the early sweet point that you want to be farming. And then the point in the Elven Capital is there's loads and loads and loads of materials that you can use to craft and power up your character. The next two dungeons we're going to talk about are a little bit less common, but they're worth pointing out. From doing your dailies, you're going to be getting this material, and you need 2 of them to be able to craft a key to go into the Shadow Forge. The Shadow Forge is, I think it's a level 70 or 75 dungeon. You can go in there. It's not very hard. You just go through. It's like multiple Ruptures chained together, but it's a really good source of those ring enchants or the monograms. It's a really good source of all the monograms in there. I think you can find weapons in there as well. And at the very end, you actually can open up 2 chests that have 3 belts in each of them, so 6 belts from this dungeon. And there's the other dungeons, I think most, if not all the dungeons actually do drop belts. So that's another reason that you would want to be running these. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, we were talking about Catacombs 1. When you complete that dungeon and do the hidden area that you go, as soon as you enter the Catacombs, if you just go straight, you can blast through the secret door and you can find material in there that you use. You need 5 of them to go into the second level of the Catacombs. And the Catacombs 2 is really awesome because when you complete it, you actually gain an extra skill point. Now, if you don't know, on Dwarven Realms, once you hit character level 200, you stop earning skill points for your passive skill tree. In theory, it is possible to max out your skill tree by doing Catacombs 2, although most players, I don't think, really hit that limit, but it's still a nice way to gain some more power. All right, at this point, you are pretty much towards the end of the mid-end game, I guess. Okay, you're kind of starting into what I consider to be the more late end game. And this, for me, usually starts around Rupture 100, but before we jump to that point, at Rupture level 80, you will unlock the Olympus. And I believe I have a video for almost all of these dungeons, so just make sure you check out our Dwarven Realms playlist for all the different Dwarven Realms guides we've made. The Olympus is going to drop you purple stance items that what's special about them is they can roll modifiers on them. Now, if you don't know, in Dwarven Realms, there's 5 different rarities. You have white, blue, yellow, red, and purple. Now, normally, only red items have modifiers on them, and all your items you can craft up. If you add 4 affixes to an item, the game lets you put on a enchant or a monogram onto the item, and these can be build defining, in turn making it reds. So normally, your purple items won't have this modifier, and you can't add a modifier to purple items yourself. So that's why the Olympus is pretty special, because this is going to be the first endgame dungeon that I'm aware of that purple items can drop in there with modifiers. Now, there's a heavy element of RNG here because you got to find the stance item you need for your weapon type, and you also got to have it roll with the modifier that you need as well. It's very heavy RNG, but it's still a pretty cool thing to keep an eye out for. Once you're doing this and you're able to clear Rupture 100, a lot more is going to open up here in the end game. The first one I want to just point out is if you are in a fellowship, there is a fellowship dungeon that you can run, and you get the keys for this I think just from being in a fellowship they start dropping, and you have to go here in your fort back here. You click on this and you can go in there. You can see there's a 50, 75, and a Rupture 100 version of this. I personally recommend just saving up all your keys until you can do the 100 version of it. The boss in there can be kind of a pain in the butt, but the amount of loot you get at the end of this dungeon is absolutely insane. And if you've saved up all these keys for that point, you're going to be able to blast loads and loads and get a really good grind session in and get some really good upgrades. The other Rupture level 100 dungeon is the Bridge of the Demigods. Now, this one you have to farm. You have to run this one to get the material to be able to unlock the next dungeon at Rupture 125. Now, the bridge also drops those special purple items. And another highlight of the Bridge of the Demigods here is it gives you insane amounts of experience points. The very first time I completed this dungeon, I gained like 45 levels from the first go, even though it took forever to kill. But once I got the first clear of the Bridge of the Demigods, all the other ones were no problem at all. But you gain insane amounts of experience. And these also, remember, these dungeons go up 1 Rupture level each time you clear it. So the more you clear it, the higher item levels you're going to be finding at the end of the dungeon for those purple gears, and hopefully getting the modifiers. But it really is about getting that material to be able to then run the Cathedral of Fire, which hosts the boss named Archeon. Once you've cleared Rupture 125, you can craft this key. Again, it requires the 5 items that you get from the bridge to craft this. This boss is quite a challenge. I have about 300 some hours of the time recording in Dwarven Realms, and I think I've only killed this boss like once, and that was during early access. I have not even killed it at launch, and it is quite the challenge. But if you follow all of our Dwarven Realms guides and you grind and progress, you're going to be at a point where it's not that big of an issue. That's one thing I love about this game, is it has that infinite power cap. You can just grind and grind and grind and get more powerful to eventually get all these down. Now, the very last final dungeon is Zol at Rupture 160. This boss is a challenge, and this is meant to be, at least in my opinion, more of a challenge dungeon and something to really stretch and kind of a long-term grind to be able to achieve. For me, my goal is to at least be able to kill Archeon a few times, and then I've never even fought Zol. I've never grinded the game enough to be able to get to that point. If you managed to get through all of this progression and you killed Zul, seriously, congratulations. You have gone absolute ham on Dwarven Realms, and you deserve a round of applause. I'm a dad, what can I say? Seriously, though, if you watch this point in the video, I can't thank you enough. And that's going to wrap it up for this Dwarven Realms progression guide video. Hopefully you found this video useful and or entertaining. If so, don't forget that like button and subscribe to the channel if you think I've earned it. Please consider becoming a YouTube channel member today. You get some pretty awesome perks such as member first videos. You also, sometimes I'll post some funny bloopers that I find while I'm editing videos. And on top of that, you'll get some behind the scenes of pictures and posts that I do as well. And also the support means a lot to me and the family. But don't forget, your view alone means the absolute world. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.